Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you all had a chance to stretch your legs, walk around so that you don't get sitting disease. Our last, you're gonna make me laugh. Oh, okay. Our last presentation, we saved the best for last. Dr. Kristin Watson. Unfortunately, Sandeep was feeling under the weather this morning, so he was unable to join us. We send our well wishes to him, but Dr. Watson has graciously agreed to do her portion and his portion, which I'm sure she'll do a fabulous job of. She is an associate professor here at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy and also an outpatient cardiology pharmacist at the Maryland VA Medical Center. She is also the residency program director of the PGY2 cardiology residency and serves as a preceptor for students and various residents in her outpatient practice. And today she's going to be vulnerable in this presentation. Go ahead, Dr. Watson.
So my vulnerability is going to kick off with, when I get to Sandeep's stuff, it is not my jam. So I was doing a little research. I quartered my pal, Dr. Knoll, up there with his PhD in teaching to try to help me with some of the stuff. So when I get to his content, I'm going to do the very best with what I understand. And I will channel, anybody who knows me and Sandeep, you know, we're like brother, sister. So I will channel the telepathy we got going on here. So who is like a Brene fan that you talk about Brene Brown like she is your friend and just call her Brene? Anybody a Brene Brown fan in here? Okay, we got one. Don't be ashamed. One. Okay, so your homework this week is you're gonna watch the vulnerability video from her, which got this whole thing started on vulnerability, and you're gonna watch her TED Talk on shame. The TED Talk on shame makes me cry every time, especially because I have 3 sons, and the difference when we talk about shame between females and males and what people have to go through when it comes to shame. So please watch those things. All the residents in the room, you can read all of her books when you're done. Residency and fellowship, but they're great quick reads and I think very, very impactful. And so I learned about Brene Brown attending a preceptor conference that a presentation was delivered by someone from UNC, and he was talking about drinking the Brene Brown juice. And I quickly caught on to that as well. And hopefully you will too. Sandeep and I chose that we did part of this presentation at an ASHP preceptor conference because some of the things that really are important for us are really developing our relationships with the residents in our cardiology program, as well as other residents and our peers in that, you know, in supporting one another. And so we thought, what could we talk about that might be something that's uncomfortable for us as preceptors, but something we really need to start digging into so we can do better for our learners. So this is for the preceptors in the room, those of you, but it's also really important for the residents, developing their relationships with their preceptors and then the learners who you're going to be precepting or interacting with. How do we really foster the learning environment? So vulnerability is really an essential part of fostering strong education and growth, as well as showing compassion for others. So you can see my learning objectives are listed here for you. And as I was sitting back there listening to my buddy, Dr. Knoll, who I'll probably talk about during this as well, because he lets me be vulnerable. And so I'll probably share some examples. I did think about, I'm gonna make him tell me afterward anything that disrupted the cognitive load theory so I can do it better later. So, oh wait, let me go back. Pretend you didn't read that. Who thinks that vulnerability is a strength? Okay, who thinks it's scary? Yeah, so I see some hands that are up that it's a strength and that it is scary, right? So when we look at the definition for vulnerability, it is scary, right? So to be vulnerable, it comes from the Latin root wound, right? Who wants to do anything that's going to get them wounded, right? So a lot of us have been forced to put up shields over time so that we're not vulnerable with others. Maybe we have been wounded and that prevents us from being vulnerable, or we have the fear of being wounded, or the mix of both, right? And so your fear about being open to attack or damage. So are you afraid to bring something up to your preceptor because you're not sure how they're going to react if you made a mistake or if you're struggling to understand a concept, right? As preceptors, we can be afraid to share what we don't know because we're like, what's this resident going to think of us or this student going to think of us if I don't know this answer to the question, right? So that can make us really, it can make really challenging for us to be vulnerable. So we'll talk a lot about Brene. So when Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, it is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But vulnerability is not a weakness. It is our most accurate measure of courage. And so if Sandeep was here, he would share a story with you. And Dr. Knoll was in the room when this happened as well. For some of you who may not know, Sandeep has a hearing disability. And that has made it challenging at times in the classroom for students for him to understand, hear what students are saying. And so it wasn't until a couple years ago, he said, I need to tell the students what is going on. Maybe they assumed it, maybe they didn't. And so before he started class that day, and we were using this new teaching style because we just do whatever Zach tells us about teaching, we were doing that for the first time in the classroom. And he was really worried about how it was going to go down with the hearing impairment. And so he stood up here and told the entire class, you know what, I have a hearing impairment. You have masks on. So Dr. Watson is in this room with me and she's going to listen and then talk to me. She may have to repeat things to me so I can understand that. How do you think he felt before he said that? He was scared, right? I was scared for him. I was like, how are people going to react? But that was so much courage, right? And what do you think the students felt in that room? They're like, you know what? If I have an impairment, if something is challenging for me, you're going to be dang sure they're going to talk to him about it because he just put himself out in front of everybody in the room. That's why he's our new associate dean for student affairs, because he puts himself out there and he lets other people put themselves out there as well, right? It's been hard, right? The same thing, I talk some challenges that I have in practice now with physicians and these nurse practitioners I work with, and how do I overcome some of these things that are tough for me. Wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, but now I'm like, you know what, if I don't put myself out there with them, how are they going to know what advice I might need, right? So we all take baby steps to doing this. So I'm not saying, you know what, you just got to be vulnerable and spill your beans to everybody under the sun. We're going to talk through what makes that possible and how we might be able to start doing that as professionals and with each other. So when we think of vulnerability is really the foundation for us making connections and having compassion. Dr. Parboni and I have known each other since she was a pharmacy student 6 years ago, right? 6 years ago. And so we have a very good relationship and I trust her implicitly. That didn't just, we were in a class together and come overnight. No, right? It has stemmed from getting to know each other, sharing challenges, asking for help, and building that trust, right? So we have to start small to build that vulnerability. I don't expect Tiffany and Katie, my new residents who just walked in the door, to trust me and to have the same connection with me that my residents from last year did, or that I have with Christian over here from several years ago as our resident, right? Because we have to build those building blocks to get there. So we have to start off with our vulnerability. So being open, sharing what our challenges are with each other, and we're going to spend more time on vulnerability. Once we start to build that vulnerability, before we can really make that connection and start to show compassion, we have to be authentic, right? What does authentic mean? How would you define authenticity? I have 3 children. So just like Brene says in one of her talks, she's a therapist, so it's good with silence. I am a mother of 3, including 2 teenage boys. So I can sit in silence for a long time and wait. Tiff, God.
Being true to yourself.
Yeah, being true to yourself. What else? What things about being true to yourself? Being true to your values, right? being true to what's important to you. I know what Dr. Knoll values. And so because of that, there's going to be things that I may not like ask him to do because I know he's got his he has his priorities in the evening and I know them and he has made them clear because he is authentic with our group, right? And so we all respect that, right? Everybody, my group knows that I don't go out, will not go out more than once a week because I need to be home with my family. And I am authentic and true to that versus them thinking, oh, she don't want to hang out, right? We might have faith-based values that we need to incorporate and we need to share what is important to us, right? So one, we have to share our struggles. That's the vulnerability and be open with those things. But then we have to really be true to ourselves. So we don't want to bend what we may do if it's not really who we are, right? Because if we're not being true to ourselves and what's important to us, we can't grow and we're not going to be able to forge good relationships. But once we have those things together, and here's a definition: being conscious of self, our other relationships, and context through critical reflection, right? And one of the things I urge you all to do as a resident, even those of you who have been out for some time, reflection used to be really scary to me. But some of you may know, I have a colleague, Brent Reed, and when he first started here, he would sit down after each lecture and write down things or anything we would do with the residents and write down little comments of reflection. And I'm like, wow, that takes a really big person to sit there and self-reflect after each activity. But that has truly shown me, even after conversations, maybe tough conversations, other things, what went well, didn't go well, how to improve, right? So as you move through your learning experiences, you move through learning experiences with your learners. Did you really engage in the kind of communication that you wanted to? Maybe when giving bad feedback, did you shy away from the truth? Right? Christine and I'll just point, we're very similar in a lot of our thoughts and attitudes about things. And we're going to hold you accountable for what you are supposed to do. You show up late for my class, you're going to lose points from my class, right? Because we are about promptness and being on time. And when we make mistakes, we own up to it, right? But if I maybe give a little wiggle room to one student, is that being authentic to myself? No, right? And it's not fair to other people. So I have to reflect on those encounters. And so do you too, right? Your interactions with your patients, etc. And then, what happened? Oh, yeah. So how do we become authentic in teaching? One, it's our self-awareness, right? Dr. Knoll was talking about something in the first session today when he was talking about learning objectives, some fancy words you used that somehow came back. Now I lost it, began with an S. It will come back to me. And then being aware of what you're teaching, right? I have to remember that I'm a heart failure person, right? And I am self-aware of that. And I am also very self-aware that I go on tangents. Ask anybody who knows me in this room. So I am self-aware of that. So I have to, that is really something when we are going up there and doing teaching. If you are not comfortable standing like he did, Zach did away from the podium, Christine giggling up here, she was fine with that, right? That was, but if that's not you or putting jokes in when you're teaching, don't do it. You have to be true to yourself. Yeah, maybe it's you're scared, you're nervous to step away from behind the podium. That's a different thing. But if you're like, I'm going to be paralyzed with fear, if I walk out there like you do, I don't want you doing that, right? So you need to be self-aware in anything you're incorporating in your teaching. And that can be individual discussions, that can be up here giving a presentation as well. We need to also, with that authenticity, is coming to build those relationships with learners. So for many of you, probably build relationship with preceptors already, other trainees. And for the preceptors, what are some things that you maybe have done to forge relationships with learners so far? I know some of you by name, so just calling you. It's cool, Christian. Christian, hit your mic. Boss lady's going to yell at us.
Okay, is that better? Okay, so as far as like improving relationships with learners, I've had them kind of have a little bit more control or choices on how their rotation goes about. So I give them like a list of topic discussions to choose from, and I tell them we have to do these ones, but you can choose some of these other ones to choose from, giving them a little bit more of a sense of like comfort and tailoring the rotation to themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? Because by doing that and giving them some flexibility in the rotation, you're letting them focus on what they're self-aware of, what they may need to learn, what they may want to focus on. But you're also not doing anything you can't handle, right? So you're not going to say, oh, I'll talk to you about everything under the sun. And then they're going to ask you to talk about malignancy. And then you're going to have to call your wife in for the conversation, right? Like that's not going to happen. We have to be context awareness when we're talking about things, right? So that's really important. And we're going to talk more about this when we get to adult learning. When we're being authentic in a situation, we're trying to be true to ourselves when we are teaching, we have to make sure that anything that maybe we're bringing in about our values is focused on, and right, keeping the political stuff out of it, focused on what we are talking about at this moment in time, right? So that we are keeping the context of what we are trying to accomplish at that time. And that self-awareness, we talked about self-reflection, so being true to yourself, but then also reflecting after everything that you're doing with teaching, even if it's a quick thought in your head and you're not writing it down after each interaction with a learner, right? Because teaching is all around us. It's not standing up here just talking to people or giving a lecture. All these interactions we have, we're teaching patients, we're teaching students, etc. So reflecting on those things so that we can also check in. Do we do what we set out to do, and did we handle ourselves in the way we wanted to handle ourselves? Listen, who's ever been screamed at by a patient? Zach, you never got screamed at? You have, okay. He's had some good stories, but we won't ask him to share his stories right now. But, have I had my moment? Like, I know I got short with a person on the phone the other day who was giving me a hard time about something. And I got off that call and I go, crap, I was not true to myself. And if I rewound the situation, I was like, what should I do differently? Because automatically in my head, I said, when this person shows up in clinic in 2 weeks, I am not talking to them because they were unkind to me, right? And then I would go, that's not being me. That is not me. I got to kill them with my kindness and think through those things. So reflect on situations, especially when they don't go how they seem. And then we have to show interest in others, right? If you are trying to forge relationships with your preceptors, with your learners, with the people you're serving, right, who are your patients, you have to show interest in them as well, right? We can't just be all about ourselves, but we really have to share those interests. But you have to talk of things about you don't want to talk about, right? I got to meet Kristin's daughter for the first time yesterday. One thing I know that my strength of mind is inclusion, so I can do this well. There's other things I can't do well, like write, but that's okay. But I can talk to Kristin's daughter. We can engage in a good conversation because I'm showing interest in her. And so one of the things I think that is really important within boundaries you feel comfortable is what can you talk about with the learner that you have in front of you when you're in these small group settings? You want to talk about favorite movies, figure out if they like Taylor Swift or not, and then decide maybe we shouldn't have let them in a residency program or other kind of things. What do you feel comfortable talking about? Movies, talking about books. Find some shared interest because then you get to learn about them and they get to see a little bit about you. But do you not want to talk about current laws that might be going on in your area about, not stopping things about vaping in this state, right? That gets me all hot. But if I don't feel comfortable talking about that with a learner, or I'm not sure they want to talk about that, we're not going to engage in that conversation, right? So again, only engaging in those conversations that are going to make you feel comfortable. So once we build these things, that's when we really can build this compassion and connection with our learners as well as with our patients as well. So why should we be vulnerable? What benefit does it have to us as a preceptor, a teacher? What benefit does it have to us? Yep.
Your learner is probably more likely to be vulnerable back to you.
Absolutely. So your learner can be more vulnerable back to you. And why might that help?
So you get a better understanding of what they know, what they don't know, what they need help with, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You're going to figure out what's working, what's not working. They're probably going to be more inclined to give you feedback, take feedback from you. What else might be beneficial about being vulnerable with your learners? What do you think? Blake, you talked to me earlier about a preceptor from UNC that you're really close to. Do you think vulnerability played a role in that?
Very much so.
Mhm. Yeah, right. So there's somebody, which I said to him, I don't know how this person has so many people in her life, but it's clearly this matters to her, right? Because I have so many people that I know have a strong relationship. She's a cards person. And he's ID, which really just it's like cards ID. We are like parallel universes here, or something. We don't mesh. Even though I like ID people, don't get me wrong. And I call them all the time because I don't understand anything. But right, it's that vulnerability and you being vulnerable with her about your strengths, things that are concerning for you, and then her being vulnerable with you really probably helped forge that relationship. And we're already sustaining a relationship and we're a couple years out of school now. Now, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say it makes you more like relatable as a person.
100%. So I love the Harvard Business Review. Asked me 6 years ago if I'd be reading the Harvard Business Review, but I love it. And so much they talk about a lot about how do you do better in teamwork's really important is something that's very important to me and learning more about that. But they talk about the best leaders are vulnerable, right? Because then you are breaking down barriers and people are going to be more likely to talk to you about challenges, right? With things. And so you bring us right to our next thing. So it breaks down these roles. So if you are vulnerable, you talk about what's challenging to you, your student's going to be more likely to be open to you and tell you, I am not understanding what you were talking about, Dr. Knoll, about re-entry arrhythmias, that picture that was there. He probably still has to teach me more about that, but because we have that vulnerability connection, I have no problem calling him on the phone and saying, help me understand this data on something arrhythmia related, right? And so there's no hierarchy. I don't feel shame. Same thing when I text people in infectious disease and they text me back, right? There's no shame asking each other for help because we have broken down those barriers and we don't judge each other for those things, right? And then it's going to make you, for those of you who are here, you're going to find out very quickly that Christine shows a great deal of vulnerability, right? And so you do. You may not think you do, but you do, right? That's why we are buds. But you're going to find because of that, you're going to be more inclined to talk to her and trust her with things, right? And so you want to think about that even with your co-residents to support each other. Because when we start to break down those barriers between us and our learners, they're going to be more receptive to come to you. And then again, building those connections, because if anything gets you anywhere in pharmacy, it's your connections, because it's a really, really small world. But more so, it's not to help yourself. It's just building those connections really enable you to grow, right? And you have people to call on and who are going to support you. Now, so let's talk about a scenario. So you are giving a pharmacy and therapeutics presentation. So let's say of Aberdeen. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. I don't like it. For people with heart failure. So I'm giving my presentation on of Aberdeen, and I am recommending to our P&T committee that we not add this to the formulary, right? And then we got all kinds of people. I got PGY1s in the audience with me. There's a medical director, say the director of cardiology is in there. Got the chief of pharmacy in the room with me as well. And somebody asks me about quality adjusted life years analysis and equal value of life years gain, cost effectiveness analysis that I put in my presentation. And so I don't really know how to interpret that, right? And I don't feel like I was adequately prepared to answer the level of detail of the question that they posed to me. Ideally, we would have been all more prepared to answer that question, but let's say I didn't. What would be your gut reaction if you were that person? And some of you may really know this data. I can't interpret that stuff well for you. My peds ICU person over here probably doesn't know how that stuff either, right? Vulnerability, we admit what we don't know. But how do you think, if you were in that situation and you got asked the question during your P&T presentation and you didn't know the answer, how would you feel inside? Not good. Anybody like me probably get really hot, like feel flushing, huh? Would you say sweaty, right? We're going to fight or flight mode. Now, what if you're the learner in the room with me, or maybe a junior colleague of mine in that room, and I say, great question, I'm going to get back to you. Because if I fluster, try to make something up, I'm going to most likely be wrong. So I got to be vulnerable in this situation and say, I don't know, I'm going to get back to you. How is it going to set the stage for the learners in the room or your junior people in the room? Yeah, they're going to be more comfortable being vulnerable. They're going to learn how to handle this situation if it arises for them in the future, right? But what if I try to blubber through an answer and say that doesn't matter? And it's really clear, I just don't know what I'm talking about. So that's a bad example. And said, what's the learner going to then do in turn when they are posed in a similar situation and they don't know the answer? Awesome, right? They're going to try to be confident instead of competent, right? And there's all these detrimental effects. So you just set the example for somebody that it is not okay to speak up when you don't know the answer. And then what then in turn happens on your rotation when you have a patient case, when there is a patient case and the resident with you doesn't, or the student with you does not want to ask for help because they feel they need to be confident versus, that was really good. I got to remember that for future. Confident versus competent. What then happens to the patient? What could happen to the patient? Right? Let's say we're doing an anti-coag thing that you don't know the student doesn't know anything about, and they're given they wind up giving a recommendation because they want to feel confident, not competent. Patient harm, right? Right? So you just set the stage by not being vulnerable that leads down this trickle down effect. And then they're going to come to you for help because they're going to be terrified that you're a know-it-all and you don't want to engage in things people don't know, right? It happens. Don't pretend like it doesn't happen. We see it happen often, right? So we have to keep that in mind. When we don't know, right? And we have to be honest about that. But that's vulnerability right there. When you were vulnerable, you were getting hot, you were getting sweaty, you were getting scared. Vulnerability is not easy, right? But it's courage. So you have courage in that moment to speak up, and you just set an example for somebody, right? So you guys are vulnerable. You just, even though you might not think you are, you already are in a lot of what you're doing, especially in your patient care environment when you don't know the answer. So how can we show vulnerability? We can be approachable, right? So you want to make you have to give a little bit to get those students to talk to you more. Even members on your team, your co-residents to talk to you. We're not here to carry everybody's burden, but we're here to work together, right? And form these relationships so we can all do better. So we got to be approachable, right? We have to demonstrate passion. We'll talk more about that passion in a little bit later. But if you think about your most favorite teachers in pharmacy school, the most favorite people who you interact with, right? It's the passion, right? Every person here who wins Teacher of the Year award, they are passionate about what they do. Preceptors of the Year, passionate about what they do, right? And then we have to share our imperfections. So an example of this is I tell this story all the time to people it still haunts me to this day, this interaction that I had with a student. A patient. So I was on my first rotation as a pharmacy student. And this is 20 years. Oh my God, I think it was more than 20 years ago now. And it still haunts me how I messed up. But I use this story because I learned from the story and I hope it helps other people be useful. So I was on the transplant rotation, which changed my life and changed what I was going to do with my life. And I went into this room and I said, Miss Christine, I'm here to talk to you about your kidney transplant medications. And her and the family said yes. Okay. And then I go through my spiel, blah, blah, blah. Did you say I'm getting a kidney transplant? And I went, are you Miss Christine? No, I'm Miss so-and-so. Well, I messed up. I didn't check birth. We didn't have name. This is way better patient care for double checks, but I knew better that I should have done a double check. And I can't blame there wasn't a name band, that we didn't do these double checks like we did then. I knew better. I knew better that I should have asked for a date of birth. I should have asked for them to repeat back to me. So what did I do in that situation? Instead of feeling shame, I had to admit to my mistake, right? And so we all make mistakes. We just have to own up to our mistakes. So share your mistakes. When you have learners come through with you, give them an example of something that didn't go right for you, because that is a vulnerability thing. And they're going to say, oh, Christian's comfortable telling about this one time a patient interaction didn't go well for him. Christian was one of our residents. That's why I can call on him and make up stories about him. Right, he can share that story. And then when they're doing discharge counseling, if the student's unsure, they're gonna be much more comfortable, right, talking about that stuff. And then we have to get uncomfortable. Vulnerability is not fun, right? We just talked about how we just felt before we admitted that we made a mistake. So I dragged on my section pretty much because I know this much more than I know him. So we're going to get to Sandeep's section. So what holds us back from being vulnerable? It's all great and good, but it is not easy. What holds us back? Brene says it's the ultimate sign of courage, and whatever Brene says is truth. What holds you back from being vulnerable? It's not fun. No. Sharing our emotions, sharing our feelings, that's not always fun.
The fear of being criticized.
Yes, fear of being criticized, 100%. What else? One thing, we've learned over the years, we've had a lot of residents come through this program, so I'm not naming any names here, but right, I precept a lot of PGY2s, and maybe their experiences in their PGY1 is holding them back, right? I'm getting to learn my 2 residents. Maybe Tiffany starts sharing more with me than Katie does. I don't know what circumstances led to Katie maybe holding back a little bit more with me. Maybe there's something that happened where she got burned before. So we always do have to give people the benefit of the doubt when they're not opening up to us. We don't necessarily know what those experiences were, but every residency program, every pharmacy school is different. Preceptors are all different. So you just can never know their experiences with learning, right? So it's uncomfortable. It's scary. You're afraid of being criticized. You're afraid of thinking somebody doesn't know what the heck you're talking about. All these things about our inadequacies, our fears and our shame, which we're going to talk about shame, can hold us back from this. So let's talk about vulnerability in the learning environment. So Sandeep's goal with this section, and I pray I do it the justice, is talking about why vulnerability is so important. And when we think about education, again, it's across every type of education we're doing, not just standing up in front of people, giving a lecture, facilitating cases. So here's a list of the most common reasons that he found why people are nervous in the learning environment, one-on-one, big classrooms, with being vulnerable. It's emotionally taxing, right? If I got to talk about somebody, how I'm really feeling, it's emotionally taxing. I also don't know how I know how he's going to respond, how she's going to respond if I'm being vulnerable. But if it's somebody else who I haven't quite crossed that bridge with, that could be emotionally draining, especially if it doesn't go well for me. It takes time and require trust, right? So think about the people that you really trust to talk things through with. Did you just walk up to them and I go, hey, Bria, I trust you. I'm going to share all my deepest thoughts and feelings and what has me concerned. I taught Brea, but do we have this relationship going on? No, we haven't been able to form good trust, right? I have a sense of, I know a touch about her. I know a touch about Amanda went here too, though sometimes with my glasses, I can't remember if I saw you, where I saw you in a classroom or as a resident, but that's another time, another day. But like we kind of have this mutual bond, but we're not going to come out of the gate racing in vulnerability with each other because they have to learn to trust me. They might have saw me as their teacher up here, but that doesn't mean they know me as an individual and can form that trust with me, right? So it's going to take time. We have this fear of being less than perfect. You don't have to raise your hand, but one of the things, perfectionism seems to be very common. Perfectionism can really hold us back from growing in certain areas. So that can definitely hold folks back. We as pharmacists have this thing about, right? It's probably about, making sure you're getting the right dose to the right patient and all that stuff. We are striving to be perfect in all our practice efforts, right? And everything we're doing so we don't cause harm. So then that we're striving for perfectionism there all the time. A lot of us have that type A personality. So it is fear of being less than perfect can hold us back. And then there's also the fear of, is it unprofessional? There's a lot of people who fear the unprofessionalism about vulnerability. And maybe past experiences led them to believe that for whatever reason. Well, why? What are some benefits? We talked about already, it builds trust and confidence. It gives us the willingness to take risk. If we are not willing to be vulnerable, we are not willing to put ourselves out there, we are not going to grow and we're not going to take risk. This is a time where I'm going to read to you a quote that has changed Brené's life. And I think about this all the time. Man in the Arena, Teddy Roosevelt. Anybody know it? Okay, well, here's a good one. I also have a really good Eleanor Roosevelt quote that I use. I'll share that with you another date. So it is not the critic who counts, not the man. I'm going to use person because we forget other people. Not the person who points out how the strong person stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends themselves in a worthy cause, who at what best knows in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if they fail, at least fails by daring greatly. So if we don't try to put ourselves out there, without failure, there's no success, right? So we got to be able to try to have some baby steps to start to be vulnerable so we can exceed, and we have to take risk. By doing this, by being vulnerable, we're sharing information. I can help you do better. You all are now going to walk into the next patient you counsel and you're going to be like, what's your name and what's your date of birth? Because you're going to be terrified that you're going to be counseling somebody who's not getting a transplant on transplant medications, right? So you're going to all do that. And then it also makes us more effective and productive. When I think of anybody who went here, we got this like solid cards team between the school and the medical center. We are one highly, very functioning and effective team. I mean, we got some of us, when you put those two together, they are like really taken off. But why do we work together time and time again? Is because we are vulnerable with each other. We let our guards down. We have built those trusting relationships that you know that you can count on those people, right? So a lot of it is coming down to teamwork. And then you are more effective with your learning and your teaching because we are letting some of that vulnerability in. And so trust is a huge component of vulnerability, right? I know what I tell her. I can tell Zach back there anything I need to. And I know he is not going to break what I tell him. I trust that he is not going to judge me for that, right? But that took 5 minutes to develop with him. No, I'm not kidding. That took years, right? But we have a very trusting relationship because we took time and we put that in there and we let each other know that we could trust each other. So how do we do that, right? How do we build trust with learners who are with us for 5 weeks on a rotation? We have to establish that interprofessional connection. Do you like T Swift? Do you not like T Swift? Is Beyonce the queen? Is Beyonce not the queen? Do you like Marvel? You know who doesn't think all those things? Zach. Zach does not. But you know what? Zach appeases me with all of my stories about them. I love Zach very much, and thus he's letting me pick on him. So you have to find those common grounds. Do you hike? Does that person hike? Do you play or pickleball? Right, pickleball's all the rage. Do you do those things? Find some commonality between the two. It might take some time. Christine and I both like pink, right? We both like Ariel. We know that. So find something that is going to work. Look at what they have on, all that stuff. Find that commonality really early on. Some people have said that they'll do like an about me page from their learners if we're rotations, or maybe they're doing some small group stuff. So they can find that commonality early on to help start forging a trusting and working relationship. We have to be very clear on our expectations. We need to be emotional, help them develop confidence and foster that learning. If we are not being vulnerable with people, we can't foster learning, because if a learner, like if Tiff's afraid to tell me, hey, Kristin, I don't know what I'm hearing when I'm listening to this heart today. If she's afraid to tell me that when we're in clinic, how was that good for her learning? No. Is that good for the patient who might be an AFib and she doesn't hear it? No, right? So we have to foster that learning, and we have to really be vulnerable to allow them to build that trust and confidence in us to tell us what doesn't work and what's not working. So these are the forms of trust that Sandeep wanted me to talk to you about. I learned all about them an hour ago. And what I think this is really interesting, it's really interesting. You can read more at that reading. You can also use your very good Google skills, what I did, to learn more about these. So calculus-based trust is what all you guys who are new in your residency suites, what residence offices are trying to figure out now, right? When Daniel and I over here first worked together, I don't know, a lot of years ago, we had to figure each other out, right? How much can I tell Kristin about this place? How much can I tell Daniel about how much I really hate Excel, right? We had to figure out those things to see what we could trust in each other for that given relationship in the workspace, right? And so we had to kind of feel each other out and what the benefit is there. So some of these, right? How much are you willing to tell somebody? And you are assessing the situation, even though you may not think of it, you're assessing what they are doing. So how much more can you give in that relationship? Your preceptor, you're watching your preceptors are watching you, your learners are watching you. Am I talking behind Daniel's back? No, I wouldn't, But if you saw me talking behind his back about something he might have told me, are you going to trust me? No, right? So we're collecting data on how we can build trust, even though we don't know it. Then we get into this knowledge-based trust, where it is, oh, I know Christine's a very trustworthy person. I know when I say, hey, don't tell her who the source of this information is from, but you got to do something about it. I have learned by seeing her in other situations that she's going to do just that, right? I'm going to learn from my residents what I can trust them with, the other providers that I can trust them with, both based on my experience. And then if you're really lucky in the workplace, I could cry maybe right now, you then sometimes find people that you can trust so implicitly in the workspace that you have this identification-based trust. You know, like you guys already figured out, Zach and I, we have, he trusts me very much too. We have identification-based trust, right? Because we have worked through these things, and I can say the same about Christine, and hopefully she can say the same about me, is because we have worked so hard on these relationships. So this helps with your learners, this helps with building your community at work too. These are the really good trusting relationships that you know, no matter what you tell them, they're going to have your back, support you, and listen to you. That's what he wanted to know here. So what happens when trust fails, right? This is where a lot of breakdowns in learning come. People can feel hurt. People can feel shameful. Maybe I'm yapping about this attending who did this, and this, and my resident's like, wait, I thought that too. Well, how are they going to feel right then? They're going to feel shameful. I might not be breaking the trust, something they told me, but you can break trust really quickly through your actions and how you talk in other scenarios, act in other scenarios, and people feel hurt. We can build fears. Trust may not be able to be formed because we are so afraid, maybe by other actions you did or maybe past experiences. And then they can feel abandoned if that trust is broken, and unworthiness. So we have to, if we're trying to build these relationships and do our best with our learners to help them grow, we need that vulnerability. We need to be authentic, and we need to start building trust, starting with that calculus-based trust. I hope I'm doing him justice. Okay, and then shame. Watch Brené's thing on shame. So shame and guilt. I'm just going to reiterate the TED Talk. No, I'm not. Her TED Talk on shame. Shame is who we feel we are. It's not anything we did wrong, right? If I did something wrong, like let's say I told Kristine's daughter that they were going to Alaska next summer, and Kristine's daughter did not know that. I couldn't remember your vacation plan, so I just kept my mouth shut when I talked to her. And right, but if I messed that up, I would apologize to Kristine. Is that shame or is that guilt? Guilt, right? So guilt is when we do something wrong and we hold ourselves accountable. Guilt is a good thing, and when we hold ourselves accountable for our mistakes, that helps us succeed. We're less anxious, we're less nervous at work. So when a learner might feel guilt with us, right? They made a mistake. Oh, I'm really sorry. I did not think about, right? You don't even always have to say, it's not you intended to do it, but I forgot to check this step today and this resulted. How do we go ahead and fix it? They feel guilty. They just told me what they did. They knew they made a misstep, right? Feeling shame is not feeling worthy, right? I have moments of shame. So I'm an outpatient cardiology pharmacist at the VA. The VA, we're independent providers, but do not get me wrong. There are times and I go, am I really do people really trust me as the pharmacist here? It was a long time, right? But I still have those moments. And one of my nurse practitioner colleagues and we go, why are our notes so much longer than the physicians? Do you know why? Because we realize that deep down inside, we have the shame that we think we are not good enough, even though we are good enough, right? But we all have this shame, and society puts so much on us that we need to be mindful of this. I'm pretty sure the reason that shame is in here is that when people really struggle with shame, shame and vulnerability are butt heads. They do not go well together, because if someone feels shame, they can't be vulnerable with you, right? They have self-doubt. Well, right, that can come from things, right? I'm not worthy enough of this. So something that's really interesting, males, where does their shame? Males feel that they cannot show what? Emotion. They can't show weakness. Right? Males, it's the social norm. They can't show weakness, right? Breaks her heart. She's got a son too. Females, don't let them sweat. You have to be perfect, right? So females have these own things have put on us as well, right? So there may be things when you're encountering somebody and they're not talking about things, you do have to think about what maybe social norms did they have? What's holding them back? What if I had a resident or a student whose last preceptor made them feel like crap anytime they didn't know anything? Are they gonna be vulnerable with me when they don't know anything? No, right? So we do need to be mindful of this. So when we feel shame, we feel embarrassed, we get disconnected and hopeless. and they're probably not going to open up to you, right? And so we can see this, we can look out for this in our learners, especially through our precepting and stuff. If they're not opening up or you hear a lot of self-doubt coming with them, bring it up with them, right? Refer them to resources, because shame is highly linked to depression and anxiety. But how do we overcome shame? How do we, as a preceptor, help a learner with shame? It's a big E word. That's probably a top 5 strength for many in you in here. What do we do? What is when people are suffering, what do we need to show them? Empathy, right? Work on the, oh, Brené's got stuff about empathy versus compassion. Watch that too. But empathy is how we help our learners. If we're concerned that there is a lot of shame, you're hearing things from them about self-doubt, you have to show them empathy. Empathy is the antidote to shame. Hold on, I'm reading my notes. Okay. Oh, people, you may also say, well, I didn't go to this big school. I didn't go to no UNC. I didn't go to Buffalo. Me, right? When I first came here, a lot of people talk smack on where I went to pharmacy school. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, maybe I should be ashamed I didn't try to go to one of these bigger, better schools, right? But at the end of the day, does it really matter? Oh, but does it still cross my mind sometimes when people talk about their schools of pharmacy? You want to believe it because there's a lot of smack talk. Oldest pharmacy school in the country, and I got a lot of smack talk, right? So we can have all these different reasons that can lead to shame. And you're not a psychiatrist, but we have to try to figure out what might be holding that back. What time am I supposed to be done? 4 o'clock? 4:15. Okay, so what other things do we have here? So fear-based tactics. We hear this a lot from students, from learners, from coworkers. What holds us back from being vulnerable, from speaking up, to have the courage to speak up? It is fear. There is the blame game. Zach just had me pass along the last lecture. Has anybody read it? What? Oh my God, you read it? Do you remember he talks about just like, you got to toss blame out, like just don't even think about blaming people. It is a waste of your time, and how much more productive we would be with not placing blame. Add that to your reading list. It is a beautiful read. Where's the hospice palliative care person? Oh, Derek, duh. Read it if you haven't read it, because you're going to be like, you're going to have just this beautiful outlook on the book on that. Derek is one of our former students, and I forgot you're back there, so I can start picking on you too. But what happens? What if we start talking about things that, like, maybe I'm a resident and I'm talking about that I'm really struggle, right? I'm really struggling, or your student is afraid to tell you on rotation because she hears somebody gossiping, right? She hears other people gossiping and she's afraid to tell you that she's struggling financially now and working crazy hours. You can't help her if she is afraid of that fear of gossip. So we have to be mindful of what causes fear and to minimize that stuff happening. So, and minimize what we are happening in our learning environment to help minimize the fear of being vulnerable, harassment, favoritism, bullying. We see a lot of being vulnerable and not having shame is all about taking accountability for your actions. That is one of the biggest things that you can do as a preceptor, is take accountability for your actions and don't blame anybody else. I was quick when I started talking about that transplant thing was, well, we didn't have the bands back then. Oh no, I knew better and I didn't do it. That is all on me why I messed up that situation, right? It was not the circumstances that I were in. So we have to show when we make mistakes and be accountable for them. This is why else fear-based can happen. So think about these things, right? Who's ever been afraid to give feedback because you're afraid of repercussions? Right? It's real easy for me to share with people who are not my employee, not my boss, when I don't like something that's going on, right? It's real easy for me to take feedback to the person who's not my boss. Is it going to be just as easy for, let's say, something's going on at the hospital. People could tell me stuff and I could advocate for them to their boss, right? Because I have no fear of repercussions from this, right? I'm not the employee, but maybe somebody at this said institution is afraid to bring this up because they're afraid of those repercussions. We got to set that culture very early in our learning experience. So that is why showing your vulnerability is the only way you're going to get your learners to do that as well. Okay, this is one I'm like super stuck on. So the adult learner, when we were doing our learning experiences, it's just, I couldn't figure out how to quite tie this into vulnerability. I asked him, he texted me, and I'm forgetting right now. This is really all about, we have to remember our adult learner psyche. And when we are showing all vulnerability, when we are talking about things that are authentic, as we did in the beginning, it's all about, we have to frame it in what matters for the adult learner. We have to frame it in real-time situations when we're showing vulnerability or are teaching. How can they apply it to something that is important to them, right? And so that's putting it in context to what will be good for them. So I can think about, I'm getting a master's in palliative care. My buddy Derek already got his back there. But a lot of the activities that we had to do in our master's program, it'd be create a scenario in which it might be challenging for you to give bad news, right? So it could be hard for me to give bad news to somebody who's got heart disease, but I know that. So then I'm going to pick something. Well, what are some other conditions I might see? COPD, somebody might not know that, right? But so by giving them some examples and where they can kind of ask them how they can use that information. Where do they need to grow in context to whatever is happening? Like Christian said, asking them for different topics that they might want to use where they know they have areas for growth. That can be really helpful for them. Other things that we know that can work when we're having vulnerability, we're trying to be vulnerability in our teaching, is really using a narrative approach. We know that adult learners work really well with applying things to cases. Why do you think we have cases when we are teaching you often in school? Well, it's that application, real world scenarios. So you can do different things. You can tell a story to share your vulnerability. You could have debates, right? There are a lot of different ways that you can incorporate into your education about the learner, and even maybe talk about what are some vulnerabilities, because we don't just have vulnerabilities, our patients have vulnerabilities. Who's ever had a person admit to them, oh, I'm using cocaine, but it's never been in a chart anywhere else? I have, right? And why is that? Because the patient might trust me over somebody else. So we have to talk about even those other how us being vulnerable is going to help with patients. I digress a little bit there. The other thing that's really important, this effective pedagogy that he included in here is really it's be excited. So if you're going to be there and be like, oh, I'm going to tell you about this scenario. Like, I will never forget not to bolus milrinone, not to give a bolus dose, because my program director 20 years ago told me this story because of her mistake. And she told me how terrible she felt when it happened. And the person became milrinone's an inotrope. You give too much at once, they get very hypotensive, and how that led to somebody having to get vasopressors and all of this stuff. But she was so animated with that story, talked about her feelings. Well, I've never forgotten that story. So if you're trying to impress upon learning things with your learners, especially with trying to help them grow and learn from your mistakes, show your passion when you are talking about that. Be engaging with them. Okay. So PM is precepting a resident. So PM's our preceptor, RD is our resident. RD is a learner on an internal medicine rotation. So PM received an email from a colleague inviting him to collaborate on authoring a national guideline. And he plans to accept and say it's okay to be nervous, being uncomfortable, since being uncomfortable leads to growth. Right? So now RD, he's telling RD what's going on. He's scared, but he's going to do it because he's going to overcome this terrifying fear of working with all these bigwigs in the world on this guideline. Now, RD presents a medical in-service, but is not able to answer all of the team's questions. And so during this feedback, RD asks if he could present another in-service to the team because he realized that he was not as prepared as he used to be. So how did PM's communication in week 1 with RD impact the learner? It didn't all make sense. So PM, let's see. Christine gets asked to be on this national PEDS guideline, right? She's like, I can't do this because she's got some shame. And she was like, I'm not up for this. I'm a pharmacist. I'm not an MD. I don't have a PhD. I'm not a nationally recognized person. And then her people are like, Christine, you can do this. We have confidence in you. Get over your shame. So Christine says, yeah, I got this. Okay. So then she tells Daniel over here, who's a student, and he's having to give she tells Daniel how she's going to rise above this fear because everybody said she should. Then Daniel goes and gives a presentation on vasopressors in pediatric patients. That just sounds terrifying. And he could not answer all those questions. And Christine had to jump in and answer a lot. So then Daniel says, hey, Christine, can I do another in-service on a different topic to the team? Because that didn't go well. What did he just get over? Because Christine talked about her situation. Christine talked about how scared she was, right? So Christine shared right from the start, she wasn't bragging. She was sharing. She's not like, hey, you're going to see my name on this guideline, because that's not what Christine does. But Christine is sharing like, hey, I could have easily said no because that's going to be comfortable. She just got in the arena, right? Like we talked about what Teddy Roosevelt said. And so she's getting in the arena and she's sharing with Daniel over here how scary that was for her. Well, so then Daniel knows that his presentation was probably not as good as it should be. So he says, let me get a do-over. And that's only because the preceptor set this stage, that it's okay to talk about what makes you uncomfortable. Sure. Okay, great. So, right, we live in our comfort zones. Every one of the best pieces of advice I got from somebody, it's probably from Zach, is you got to step out of, you got to do something every day that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe that's speaking up, showing your learner that you're speaking up on rounds, or bringing up an argument. Because when you do those things in front of your learners as precepting, you are, and you said, oh, that was scary. I'm really nervous, but I got to talk to the surgeon about this today. You are setting the example that you are facing your fear head on. Then once we get our learners to realize we got to step into our fears, because Daniel's like, oh God, I just bombed that in-service on vasopressors about PEDS, but I'm going to go back at it, even though it's scary as stink because I embarrassed myself. You didn't embarrass yourself. You're just a learner. He's also like, I don't know what words you're saying here, Kristin, but that's okay. But he's going to go back and be fearful again, because then what's going to happen? He learned from that mistake of his first presentation, and now he is heading in. He's going to try something new. And guess what just happened to Daniel? He grew, and now he says, I want to be a pediatric pharmacist, right? So if we are not vulnerable, if we don't show, we have vulnerability is scary. So if we show that, we allow our learners to get into the fear zone, break through what scares them so they can learn and grow. Now, I think we're almost there. Okay, so PM has been a pharmacy preceptor for 3 years. Let's pick on somebody. Derek is a preceptor. Okay, Derek's in the back over there. Derek. Okay, and then Amanda, she is our PGY1 resident on our first rotation. So I'm just going to take away these acronyms. Maybe that's going to mess you up. Now, SC over here, let's stick with these acronyms and hope this flows better. SC feels that when the preceptor turns into a interrogator, when SC does not know the answers to questions or misses something for one of the patients they are covering. Who has ever seen a preceptor do this, have a preceptor do this to them or somebody else? Yeah, right? Been there myself. SC feels like PM likes to play the blame game whenever something wrong with medications, right? Who sees that when they staff, right? You hear, it's always somebody else's fault when something goes wrong. And so SC now educated our learner educated a patient about an hour ago and realized they shared the incorrect information when the patient asked the question about the medication. They told them the wrong side effects of the medication. Now, SC doesn't know what to do, right? Because SC really needs, the learner really needs to go to the preceptor and correct this, right? Which SC is afraid to do so. So why is our learner intimidated? Why is she intimidated? Why is SC intimidated? Why is SC fearful of speaking up? Yeah, being interrogated, right? She's not feel like she's learned, right? If we're interrogated, can we function well with giving answers? Oh, no, we cannot, right? Because now we have like our heightened level of fear. What else? How might the preceptor respond to SC when they admit to their mistake? They going to make them feel good? No. Are they going to blame SC that's their fault? Right? So all this fear, SC is not going to show vulnerability because this preceptor just set the stage. If you are vulnerable, I'm going to break you down. Right? And that does, how does that help SC grow to do better? No, right? So SC, if the situation were reversed, right? So someone's, Katie back here, someone's on rotation and they make a mistake, they're going to say, you know what? I just provided the wrong education. I think I didn't give the right information. So they're going to rework the scenario and how they would have did things differently and went back and done this situation. So the learner was scared to tell the preceptor. You're going to be scared if you make a mistake and tell the preceptor. But if the preceptor embraces your mistake, because we all make errors, the learner is then, they went into that fear zone. You are now working through this with them, and they are now going to be able to grow because you set that learning environment for them. Vulnerability, authenticity is all about creating this learning environment where they can grow. Okay, vulnerability is to wrap it up, vulnerability is the foundation to authenticity. When we are vulnerable and then authentic, we can forge these wonderful relationships with our learners that can carry you forth in the years to go. But most importantly, it's going to allow them to grow. We can't build better pharmacists. We can't grow the profession and allow our learners to excel if we're not able to kind of step out of our own comfort zone and work with them to grow. Demonstrating emotional vulnerability can increase learner receptivity by telling them what was hard for you, why it was hard. Maybe you had a challenging case. One thing I learned at a preceptor conference years ago is when these cases are really hard, when you're at a code situation and the person dies, or we have somebody who we're talking about hospice, that hurts, right? That can really hurt. Even though you didn't do anything to fail that situation, it was the body giving up. That can be really hard. But engaging in those type of situations is going to let the learner realize that you were just another human being in front of them, not some superhero. And you are going to help them because they can talk to you. They're going to learn, they're going to become more confident, resilient, and then become autonomous. When learners are not being able to grow in the rotation, we really need to take a hard look at ourselves and see what we are doing and help them do better. I mean, sometimes you can't help. Sometimes there might be things that you can't help, but you really got to take a hard look at what you might be doing in that situation. And then here are just some things, I'm not going to read through these, but like, here's some things, just little things that you can do to bring vulnerability into your rotation so that they are being more likely to talk through things with you. And then here's some more, Brene. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose, right? your purpose, the reason you're all well, some of you are required to sit here right now, but there are other people who I know do not need to have to be in this room right now. But you are in this room and you are listening and you are engaging because you know your purpose is to train future pharmacists, right? And the residents are here because they're going to train future pharmacists and want to be trained. So you know what your purpose is. You know part of your purpose is to teach and educate others. The level we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection. So when you are vulnerable this year, and you got to when you are afraid to be vulnerable, you got to take a step back and figure out what's holding you back. And if you can fix it, try to fix it. You may not be able to. That's a really motivating thing. I'm wearing down. Okay, so what questions, what thoughts do you have? Who's going to go home and watch it first? Who's going to go home and watch TED Talk on the drive home? Zach, we can watch on the bus together. Put our AirPods in. Mm-hmm.
I don't do Apple.
I know you do. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. See, but we still love each other because I love Apple. He has a hatred. I have a love. It all works out. What questions do you have? Thoughts? Anything else that anybody wants to share? Ask. Yes, Daniel.
Someone asked online what book you were referring to a little while ago. I believe it was when you were singling out Derek for being a PalCare pharmacist.
Oh, the last lecture. Who wrote it?
Randy Posh. There's a YouTube video on it, and then there's a book that he wrote.
Mm-hmm. I have not brought myself to watch the video because I anticipate that I would cry like a baby. So I got to be an emotional, but cry because it is so beautiful. It is so beautiful. Please read it. What else? Any other questions? Well, have a grand time if you're going to the MSHP thing. I wish you loads of success. Google Brene Brown. There's loads of stuff out there. Harvard's Business Review is very helpful if you want to learn more on this topic. Do you have anything to say?